Bonne Terre. Wow. Now, back in Bonne Terre, back in the day, Bonne Terre was nothing but a little, mining colony. There was no money here. But there's a First State Community Bank now? Might give Bonne Terre a second look. Okay. Well, now I don't remember anything about Bonne Terre proper, but I do remember something about 35, 40 miles south of here, a place called Gad's Hill. Anybody heard of Gad's Hill? Oh, there they are. Okay, well, let me tell you what I know about it. Well, back in those days, Gad's Hill was nothing but a little whistle stop on the Iron Mountain Railroad, probably about 15, 20 people in the whole town. No one would give that place a second thought either. But there's something about that name, Gad's Hill. Where'd that come from? Well, it turns out that Gad's Hill in Missouri was named after Gad's Hill in Great Britain. It was Charles Dickens' estate, and a known resort for highwaymen out there. So we figured, well, if it's good enough for the highwaymen of Great Britain, maybe the highwaymen of Missouri should go down there. But there was another reason as well, and this is because of Cole Younger and my brother Frank. You guys know Frank? Well, they loved their Shakespeare, and they would quote it back and forth to each other, and they read all the plays. And they let me know about one play there called Henry IV, Part 1. There's a section in there where a man named Falstaff robs the pilgrims at Gad's Hill. And then a man named Prince Hal robs Falstaff. Now they told me what Shakespeare was talking about was robbing the robbers. And I like the sound of that. Robbing the robbers. Okay, because that's what we were going to do. We were going to rob those train companies. Those train companies have been robbing the citizens of Missouri for years. Missouri citizens paid triple the taxes of those in the states around them, like Iowa and Illinois. It's all because of the trains, because they had all these local government bonds, paying out to the train companies to lay tracks in the town, keep their town important. But a lot of those train tracks, they never got laid. And they still had to pay out to them, so they've been robbing the citizens. We're going to take a little bit back for the citizens of Missouri. So we went down to Gad's Hill. And there were 5 of us that did this. Myself, my brother Frank, Cole Younger, John Younger, and a man named Arthur McCoy. Now, when there's only 15, 20 people, 5 heavily armed men, I had no problem rounding them up. You just get all the women and children, and then all the men will follow. Now, this is a cold January day, so we did a little bonfire by the train depot. Now, if you want a train to stop in those days, you got to raise a red lantern or a red flag. They know that there's some sort of danger on the track. Maybe there's a loose rail or something blocking their path. But in this case, the danger was someone was going to rob that train. So there wasn't much to it. It was a southbound train, but we knew there'd be money on it because that time of year, they're putting money down there for cotton purchases. So we hop on that train. There's a couple passenger cars, a sleeper car, and a mail baggage car. A mail baggage car, that's the one I'm interested in. So we have John Younger watching people at the train depot. Cole and Frank are in the cars, they're doing their little Shakespeare routine, and Arthur McCoy's trading hats with people and keeping it real fun. But I find myself the Adams Express messenger. And that's who I was looking for, and I dragged him back to the mail baggage car. I get back there and I say, now you're going to open that safe, I'm going to blow your damn head off. Now, I didn't swear when I was a kid, but I learned when you point a gun at someone, a little swearing makes them know you're serious. And I've always said, if you got a gun on you, and you got to open a vault or a safe, you're taking your life in your own hands. What you going to do? So, that Adams Express messenger didn't want to die that day. So he opened that safe for me. There's another safe in there that he didn't have the key to. I took a pick to that, got a little hole in there, pulled out all the money parcels I could. Now, no one would have known about Gad's Hill, except for one reason. I left a note with one of the passengers, saying, wire that to the dispatch up in St. Louis. And what it said was that this southbound train on the Iron Mountain Railroad was robbed by 5 heavily armed men, a blank amount of dollars, but then fill in the blank. About $6,000, not too bad. And so, that robbery became the first train robbery in Missouri history after the Civil War. So we made a little history down Gad's Hill, just down the way there. But I was already a famous outlaw by then. Everybody knew who Jesse James was by then. Where did I come from? Was I born an outlaw? I don't think so. I was born in northwest Missouri, Clay County, just outside of Centerville. You might know it as Kearney. My folks came up from Kentucky, They loved the way the hills were there. It reminded them of Kentucky. My father, Robert Sally James, and his wife, Zerelda, my mama, they took care of me, but for just a little while, because one of my first memories was clutching on to my daddy's leg. And I'm just pleading with him. I said, Daddy, please don't go. Please don't go. My daddy was a preacher, and he was also a hemp farmer. And he had a congregation there at the New Hope Baptist Church, about 300 people, not too bad. And he had 3 kids, and my brother Frank, myself, and my sister Susan. And I'm telling him, please don't go. Where is he going? He's going out west with the gold rush. He says he's going to watch over those men, maybe make his fortune. I understand trying to make a fortune. And that makes sense, but you're leaving a lot behind. And he said he was going to come back, and I'm clinging on to him. I said, please, Daddy, please don't go. And they say my tears almost made him stay. But they didn't. And he left. And 3 months later, he hit the coast of California. A month after that, he was dead. Fever in a place called Hangtown. Hangtown, California. So that my mama, Zerelda. What I didn't have in a daddy, I sure got made up for in my mama. Because she was as tough as any 3 men, let me tell you. And she remarried again to a man named Benjamin Sims. That marriage didn't last too long because he fell off a horse and died about a year after that. But she found out she did not get his property. She's a woman. They didn't have a lot of rights back then. So when she married for a 3rd time, about a year after that, to a man named Dr. Reuben Samuels, she got what they called a prenuptial agreement. 19th century, my mama was smart enough to get a prenuptial agreement. Said, if that marriage ever dissolves, she's going to get 200 acres and 6 slaves to help her run it. That's how smart my mama was. And she was always in charge. But just because I was an orphan, that didn't make me some sort of outlaw. I had, father figures. I had an uncle, Wild Bill Thomason. And, there were a lot of Wild Bills back then. But this guy put his exploits up with anybody. He fought in the Mexican War, hung out with the Comanche Indians, and he's the one that taught Frank and I how to live in the forest, how to shoot guns, how to shoot guns off the horse. It's not so easy. You got to get on your haunches and, just aim that gun. Shot bows and arrows, and I got to be a pretty good shot. But Frank's cold-blooded killer with a rifle. I'll put him up with anybody, anytime, American history. But just because we shot guns, did that make us outlaws? No, there were a lot of kids shooting guns back then. It was just what we did. You read that Mark Twain book, Tom Sawyer? That's what we were doing. Playing pirates, cowboys, and Indians. But there was something along the way that happened, changed the whole landscape of Clay County. That's because of the President of the United States. I'm about 7 or 8 years old at this time. I don't know anything about the President of the United States. Franklin Pierce? Who's that? But he signed into law something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, what's that? I didn't know what Kansas or Nebraska was. Well, it turns out that those were 2 new states that were going to come into the Union. That seemed to be no big deal, but he was going to give them what they called popular sovereignty. Now, what's that? That means that they are going to get to vote on whether they're going to have slavery in their states. Now, before that, about 2 states would come into the Union. One would be an abolitionist state, one would be a slave state. But in this case, they were going to let them vote for the first time. And that drove a lot of people into Kansas. Everybody wanted to influence that decision. And you start having these people starting to intimidate each other. Burning down houses. They start these Roman gangs over there. There's guys with red legs, red stockings. They call them red legs. Or jayhawkers. These abolitionist gangs. Jim Lane, John Brown. They start shooting and murdering people. So you get the response on the other side. You got slave owners, starting their own gangs called bushwhackers. They jump out of the bush and whack it. Pretty simple as that. And this is before the Civil War. Everyone thinks this all started with the Civil War. This is before that. I'm 7 or 8. People starting to kill each other. And then, of course, the Civil War does start. Man, we had already picked our side. My folks were from Kentucky. We had slaves. We had the Southern Pride. Clay County was mostly, slave owners and farmers. So we knew how we were going to go in that war. But when that started, I was only about 14. There was no army going to take Jesse James. But my brother Frank, now he was 18 years old. And he joined himself the Missouri State Guard. It's a pro-Confederate group. And he went down to Wilson's Creek. First big battle in Missouri during the Civil War. He fought under General McCullough, Sterling Price down there. And he hated it. He hated the whole style of fighting. These guys lining up, And they didn't have any uniforms, you know. They had rifles and they didn't even have any ammunition. They would take scrap metal, throw them in the rifles and shoot them at people, you know. And, you know, fighting over territory that no one cared about after the battle was over. It didn't make any sense to Frank. He ended up catching the measles down there and had to come home. But he got on a list with those Union soldiers. They knew who Frank James was, so they arrested him. And they paroled him after that on the condition that he never would fight for the Confederacy again. Well, technically he never did, because he joined those bushwhacking groups. And those bushwhackers were never part of the Confederacy. They would never give them credit for anything, so they voted under the black flag. So, you know, these Union troops found out Frank's with the bushwhackers, so they come up to my farm. You know, I'm plowing the fields. This is 1863 now, I'm a 16-year-old boy. And these Union troops come to the farm, and they come to the field, and they ask me, they say, "Where's Frank?" Well, Frank's not home. I don't know where he's at. He's out with bushwhackers. He's doing whatever he wants. They didn't like that answer. They start to beat me and lash me like a slave. They throw me down on the ground and they beat me until I can't stand. And I'm the one that got off easy. You know, my father was on the porch. They asked him the same question, "Where's Frank?" Same thing. He doesn't know. They string him up a tree. They hang him till he can hardly breathe. Then they bring him down. They say, "Where's Frank?" He still doesn't know. They string him up again. They string him up 3 times. You know, bring him within a breath of his life. He was not the same after that. He had brain bubbles in his head, you know. And after that, you know, I was always going to be for the Confederacy. But I wanted to kill Yankees after that. I was ready to kill any Union soldier out there. And after that, I was ready, but still, 16 years old. They're not going to put you in any sort of group. But there was one man that was going to bring all those bushwhackers together. And that was William Quantrill. And so he got all of them together, about 450 of them, down by the Missouri River. Now, they let me go to the base camp there. You know, they wouldn't let me join the group, but they said, "Why don't you load some guns for us?" Now, back in the Civil War, it wasn't like it was afterwards. You can't just put a bullet in a gun and shoot somebody. They had those old Navy revolvers. You know, you had these little metal balls, and you had the paper, grease it up, put it in, make sure the firing caps are all straight. They would misfire all the time. That's why you saw bushwhackers with like 6 guns on them, 8 guns, maybe even a dozen guns on them. Because if one misfired, they just grab another one and shoot that one at you. That's how they did it back then. But you see, I was loading one of those guns, and it went off in my hand, blew up a little tip of my middle finger. Now back then, 16 years old, I still had that preacher's son in him a little bit, and I didn't swear. And I was just, "Dang, dingus, oh!" And when I said the word dingus, well, that caught something in Frank's ear. He's like, "Oh, nickname." So he called me Dingus for the rest of his life. Anytime Frank was mad at me, just call me Dingus. Ugh. Now, I wanted to ride with Quantrill that day, but they wouldn't let me. But what Quantrill was doing with all those bushwhackers is he was going to ride to Lawrence, Kansas. Now, if you don't know about Lawrence, Kansas, that was the abolitionist capital of that state. But it was 60 miles away. They didn't think they would be touched by all this border skirmishes. You know, not like Clay County. It was right nearby. So 60 miles away, anybody knows anything about horses, you can ride a horse about 20, 25 miles in a day, or it's going to drop on you. So what they did, these are hot August nights, and they would ride in the nights and hide in the shade during the day. And ride at night again, hide in the shade in the day. On that 3rd night, right when dawn was coming up on Lawrence, 450 bushwhackers ready to ride down on that town. So the sun comes up and they ride down in there, they burn and loot that town. They killed 200 men. This is 1863, after Gettysburg. You know, the Southern man's licking his wounds. You know, this is the most glorious victory that the Southern man had in all of 1863, was burning of Lawrence. And they were whooping and hollering. Every man that was there was a Southern hero. Cole Younger was there. My brother Frank was there. Bud Shirley was there. If you don't know who Bud Shirley is, that's Miss Myra Maybelle Shirley's older brother. You might know her as Belle Starr. So Quantrill had a connection with all these talkers you got here tonight. But after Quantrill, things got really ugly. General Thomas Ewing issued General Order Number 11, basically vacating all the counties near the border in Missouri. So when all these families had to leave, they would just burn and loot them on the way out. They call it the burnt district. And that included my family. That included Cole Young's family. That included the Shirleys. They had a general store down south. They burned that down, you know. And so my family, they were supposed to come south, but they went up, just crossed the river into Nebraska. Lived in Lulo, Nebraska for a little while. I'm not going up to Nebraska. I'm going to fight. I am tired of sitting on the sidelines of this war. And I get in there with Fletch Taylor for a little while. He gets shot in the arm. He gets out of action. I join Bloody Bill Anderson's group. Ooh. And if you don't know who Bloody Bill Anderson is, who he lives up to his name, he would not only kill you, he'd scalp your head. And he'd put his scalps on his horses. He would wear them around his neck. Ruthless killer. And he had cause too, because they rounded up his sisters and his cousins. They had an order that said any woman that aided and abetted the enemy was going to be arrested. Put him in a makeshift jail in Kansas City. That jail collapsed, killing his sisters and his cousins. And after that, he was a ruthless killer, had no mercy. And I rode with him up to Centralia, right in the middle of northern Missouri. And we had about 80 bushwhackers with us that day. We found ourselves a big old keg of whiskey. And if you think bushwhackers are crazy when they're sober, we'll put some whiskey in them. And we got mean. And then the train came in. About 125 people on that train, including 25 Union soldiers on a furlough. Bloody Bill lined all of them up, killed them. All 25 of those soldiers, save one, just so he could tell the tale. And when that happened, the Union soldiers, they got wind of what was going on. They hunted down Bloody Bill and killed him. And that happened all throughout the war. You know, there'd be a big fight, and then they'd hunt him down and kill him. I ended up with Archie Clement by the end of the war. But by the end of the war, we knew we weren't going to win. You know, Southern man had the willpower, but he didn't have the manpower. You know, he didn't have the bullets. He had the pride. And so we knew we were going to have to surrender. In 1865, we were going to go down to Lexington. And on the way, we ran into the cavalry of the 3rd Wisconsin. And they'd been drinking. And they started shooting at us. We start shooting at them. And I get hit right in the lung. Almost a fatal injury. So when I surrendered in Lexington, I had to surrender horizontally in the Virginia Hotel. You know, they carted me back to Kansas City, and I had to heal up at my aunt and uncles and my cousins, the Mims. And that was the end of the war. Southern man is down. Union is running everything, even in Clay County. And we're not ready to give up the fight. Maybe everybody else was, but Archie Clement and I, we were not ready to give up the fight. We just started this thing. So he got himself an idea. And on February 13, 1866, we went to Liberty, Missouri. Now, Liberty, Missouri is the county seat of Clay County. And they had themselves the Clay County Savings Association, a bank in town. Now, before the war, the Clay County Savings Association was the Farmers Bank of Missouri, started by Southern sympathizers. But during the war, it was bought by a radical Republican, and by the end of the war, nothing but Yankees putting their money in there. In fact, Union soldiers getting their pensions out of there. You know, Southern man's not getting a dime. Union soldiers getting paid for being in the war. So we figured, hey, why don't we take a little withdrawal from that bank? So about a dozen of us line up on Franklin Street, wearing Union soldier uniforms, those blues, yeah, just to thumb our noses at them. 2 of us go inside. Maybe one of them was me. Maybe it wasn't. Nobody knows. Nobody can prove anything. But when I went into that bank with Archie Clement, I put myself down a $10 note. And I said, I'd like that exchanged. And there are 2 cashiers there. There's a father and a son, Green-Up Bird and his son William. William takes the $10 note, turns around. When he comes back, he got 2 guns on him. I said, we intend to rob this bank of every cent. And if you say a word, I'm going to blow your damn head off. And I've said, if you got guns on you, and you're supposed to open a vault or a safe, you're taking your life in your own hands. So what you going to do? Well, the birds didn't want to die that day. In fact, they loaded up everything they had in that bank. Government bonds, gold, silver, greenbacks. Turns out it's $57,000 worth of money there. Now, we didn't know anything about money in those days. Nobody had any money. Before the war, you may have a couple coins, for some candy. Your crops coming in, maybe a little bit of folding money. But this was all new to us. So we didn't even care about the money that much. We just liked that we were making that statement. War's not over. We're not just going to lay down to this northern tyranny that's coming around. We're not doing that. So we start liking this bank robbery thing. So we go down to Richmond, Missouri. Why Richmond? Well, that was the place where they took Bloody Bill's body, drug it all around town, took pictures of his dead body, cut his head off, put it on a telegraph pole. Well, we went in there, went to the bank there, took about $3,500, They figured out what we were doing there. They started taking shots at us. Well, that got us excited. We thought we were back in the war. So we take secure positions and we start shooting back, take out 3 of their citizens, including the mayor, before anyone knew what happened. We rode out of town, whooping and hollering. Well, after that, they caught up with Archie Clement. They knew he was involved and they took him down. So all my mentors, everyone that taught me everything in the war, all those bushwhackers are almost gone. So it's just me and Frank. And so we say, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to just lay down and let this new world happen to us? Or are we going to keep robbing banks? We're going to keep robbing banks. We go up to Gallatin, Missouri, looking for a man named Samuel Cox. Samuel P. Cox. Because he's the man who said he killed Bloody Bill Anderson. They said he worked at the bank there. So we go inside, and I put down a $100 government bond. And I'd say I like that exchanged. Now, when you exchange bonds in those days, you're not going to get $100 for a $100 bond. You get about $60 maybe. See, the bank takes their cut. It's not stealing, that's not robbing, that's just their business. So Frank says, well, I will exchange that bond if you write me up a receipt. So the cashier agrees. He's going to go write up a receipt. I look at Frank, gives me that nod. And that means that's Samuel Cox. So when Samuel Cox comes back with that receipt, I put one in his heart, one in his head. No more Samuel Cox. They heard our shots in there. They start shooting us up in the streets. We jump on our horse. Frank jumps on his horse. I jump on my bay mare, Kate, and we start riding down the center of town, whooping and hollering. Well, all that shooting frightens Kate from me, and she bucks me back, and I fall off my horse. I get stuck in the stirrups. She starts dragging me down the middle of the street, and I can't do it. I say, Frank, you gotta come back. Frank, help me out. And Frank has to wheel around and come back and hold down Kate and get me back on my horse, and we start riding out of town again. We're so happy. We say, yeah, we killed Samuel Cox. We killed Samuel P. Cox, the man who killed Bloody Bill Anderson. Get our names in the paper. We're all excited. Frank and Jesse James, desperate men and notable bushwhackers during the war. Yeah, we're killing Samuel P. Cox. And we look at it and it says, they are wanted now for the murder of Captain John Sheets. Oops. Well, if there was ever a man I regret killing, it's Captain John Sheets, who they said resembled Samuel Cox. Now, I don't want to kill anybody's doppelganger, but be careful on who you look like, because you just might suffer their fate. But after that, in Gallatin, we got our names in the paper. Newspaper man notices that. A guy named John Newman Edwards. Well, he wrote for the Dispatch in St. Louis, crossed over to the other side of the state, helped start the Kansas City Times. He's a Southern boy himself. Wrote with Joe Shelby in the war. And he wrote all about their exploits down in Mexico, and he had what they called 90-proof writing. And that meant it had a lot of exaggeration and embellishment, but it flowed like a smooth whiskey. So I enjoyed his writing. But the thing was, he liked this new thing that was going on with Frank and Jesse James, these rebels of the Reconstruction. So he came up and talked to us. Now, Frank didn't like to talk about being a wanted man. I liked it. I like saying the whys and the wherefores of why we're doing everything we do. Frank's a cold-blooded killer, but it chafes him to think that he's a wanted man. I'll tell you a joke, I'll smile. Frank won't smile at all. He'll look you cold in the face. So when John Newman Edwards wrote about us, the first few pages are all about Jesse James and his gang. It's not the Frank James gang. You don't hear about Cole Younger's gang. It's the Jesse James gang. I'm starting to feel pretty good about myself. He's comparing us to these noble conquerors of Europe. We could have been knights with King Arthur at the Round Table. Yeah. Said we could have ridden with Napoleon Bonaparte, been bold robbers like Alexander the Great. I like that. Bold robbers. Because that's what we were. We weren't thieves. Thieves will sneak into your house, try and take things. Don't look at me. Don't find me. Bold robber will come up to you, show you his weapons, tell you what he wants, and he's going to take it. So being a bold robber, that's what I like. But there was one name that stood out over all those other conquerors, and that was Robin Hood. Jesse James was the American Robin Hood. That's what everybody said. Robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Now they want to make a big deal. Did we really give to the poor? But we definitely robbed from the rich. Those train companies and those banks, you know. Think of the farmers of Missouri, you know. They're getting foreclosed on by all these banks, you know. And these trains, you know, they're skyrocketing prices on all their goods. You know, they want a hero. They want a Jesse James. I mean, think about the Southern man. He doesn't get to vote. He gets no representation in this new tyranny that's going on for him. They need a hero. All the poor people need a hero. Now, did we go around looking for the poor, saying, oh, you poor, here's some money? No, we didn't do that. Because, I mean, think about it. If you rob a bank, where are you going to put your money? In another bank? No, you're going to spend it. You're going to pass it around. But I can think of one story that kind of sums up that Robin Hood legend. And this was when Frank and I were coming through the Ozarks, south of here. You know, we had been in Arkansas, robbed some stagecoaches down there. And you don't always have a restaurant or a hotel to go get something to eat at. So you stop by a farm and say, well, you know, could we have ourselves a meal? We'd be happy to pay you for it. And that's what we did. We found this one farm, and you know, it's pretty run down, it's kind of a shack of a place. Knock on the door, there's a little old lady there. And we said, well, could we bother you for a meal? We'd be happy to pay you. And she said, well, I don't have very much, but you know, what I have, I'll share with you. Just wait on the lawn. I think she was a little embarrassed of what her little shack looked like. And we understood. And she came out with some biscuits a little bit later. And, you know, she had tears in her eyes. I just said, well, ma'am, you know, I'm sorry. We didn't mean to frighten you or anything. She said, no, it's not that. You know, my husband just passed away. And seeing men on the farm, you know, just brings back those memories. And the other thing is, the bank man was coming. Getting ready to foreclose on her farm. $800 she owed them. She didn't have that. They were going to take her farm away. Now I look at Frank, and Frank looks at me. And I say, well, ma'am, because you remind me of my mom, I'm going to loan you $800. And she got so happy, you know, just good feeling inside of her. She said, I don't know how I'm ever going to repay you. And we said, well, no, don't worry about that. Just make sure when the bank man comes, you get yourself a receipt, a proof of payment. So we give her that $800 and even pay her for that meeting. And we go on our way, and then the bank man comes, sure enough, later that day, ready to foreclose. Very shocked to see the money. And happy to take it, you know, the bank man will always take the money. And so the lady gets to keep her farm. She's very happy. The bank man's happy, he gets his money. He goes riding up the road. A couple miles up that road, he gets robbed by a couple highwaymen. They took him up that $800 and everything else he had. So I guess Robin Hood must have been in that forest there. So Robin Hood was all over Missouri. So we're starting to get this legend about us, especially Jesse James. But when you get a legend, you start to get enemies. And those train companies didn't take it lightly that we were taking money from them. So they hired themselves the Pinkerton Detective Agency out of Chicago, Illinois, run by Alan Pinkerton. And once they got hired, they opened up a little business in Kansas City, run by his brother William. And they start having detectives coming against the youngers and the James boys. They send one detective to go check on the youngers. They say check on detectives. They're spies. That's all they were. And they're trying to spy on us in our own territory. So one guy, Captain Lewis Lowe, goes to spy on the youngers. Well, of course, they get tipped off that he's coming. And John Younger and Captain Lowe get in a shootout. And both of them go down. John gets it in the neck, but he gets Captain Lowe, and they both go down. Now that's the way for an outlaw to go out. I hate to see John go like that, but if an outlaw is going to go out, toe-to-toe, looking at his enemy, pulling up his weapons, whoever's standing wins. If they both go down, that's how it is. So that's a noble way for an outlaw to go. But the man they sent to spy on the James boys, well, he was just an arrogant fool. A guy named Joseph W. Witcher. And he went to Liberty. First thing he did, getting off the train, is going to the bank, telling the bank president what he was going to do. Now, the bank president was a Republican, so he thought he was on his side and everything. The bank president didn't want any trouble with the James boys. He knew what we could do. So he brings in the ex-sheriff of Clay County, Oliver Moss. Oliver Moss says the same thing. He said, well, the James boys aren't on that farm all the time, but I would not go up there because the old woman will kill you just as quick as the boys will. I love my mama. So the bank president actually tipped us off that he was coming. And we knew it, and he came up there, gave us a false name, said he was a farmer and a laborer. I said, oh, you're a farmer, huh? Let me see your hands. He shows his hands. Smooth as a city boy's. Now, I know farmers' hands. I was a farmer as a kid. He was rough, cut up, didn't take anything. Not these slick hands that he had. And when he held out his hands, he had tattooed on his wrist, JWW, giving his name away. We knew exactly who he was. He had guns that said PGG on it, Pinkerton Government Guard. So he was the worst detective to ever send to the James boys. We bound him up and gagged him. We're going to kill him on our property, so we sent out, going to the Missouri River, wait for the ferry to come. The ferryman looks, and we said, well, that's nothing but a horse thief. So we take him to the other side. Long story short, they find him dead with 3 bullet holes in him, and a note that says, "This to all detectives." So the gauntlet was laid down. But about this time, I'm about 27 years old. About time to settle down. Now, I told you at the end of the war I got shot and I had to stay with my aunt and uncle and my cousin, the Mims. And my cousin was named Zerelda Mims. Same name as my mama. Named after my mother. Well, we had been courting silently since the war, 9 years now. So I was going to ask her to be my bride. Of course, she said yes, but you got to convince her father. Now, try talking to your uncle about trying to marry his daughter. And he knew about Jesse James, so I had to do some smooth talking, saying, half the stuff they write about us isn't true, and finally I talked him into it. But even during the wedding ceremony, we're up there and someone yells out, "Detective's coming!" And we all start to scramble, and I'm getting ready to hop on a horse, and my wife, she's coming down, she's hiding in the bed, and they say, "Oh, false alarm." So even on my wedding day, we got detectives on the brain. John Newman Edwards says in the paper, "Captured Jesse James," and his captor is the beautiful and lovely Mrs. Zerelda Mims. Frank gets married about 6 months later to a girl named Ann Ralston, but her family's Irish, didn't want anything to do with Frank. So she had to write a note, said I'd gone to get married and heading out west, basically eloping. And that reminds me, what's the difference between an in-law and an outlaw? Anybody know what the difference between an in-law and an outlaw is? Outlaws are wanted. Huh? Yeah, I thought it was funny when I heard it. But getting our names in the paper saying we're getting married, that just made those Pinkertons that more upset. They couldn't catch us, they couldn't pin anything on us, so they decided they were going to get more evil than an outlaw. Outlaws may do some rough and tumble things, but there's a little bit of nobility to me. I never shot a woman. I never went after kids or anything like that. But these guys, they wanted to get Jesse James so bad, they came up with a plan so diabolical I could never even imagine it myself. And what they did is they sent a light train from Chicago, just a locomotive and a caboose, sent 8 men on it. Didn't even stop in Liberty, they just stopped right by my neighbor's farm, Daniel Askew's place. 8 men jump out. They set up a little base camp. They heard that Jesse James was on the farm. Now, I was on that farm that night. I had dinner with my family, but then we left. But in the dark of night, they descend on my mama's farm. They go up, and this is cold night in January. So they've got, wood boards on the windows. That place is all like a citadel, a little fortress. And they go up and say, "Bring out Jesse James." Well, Jesse James not there, and even if I was, they wouldn't bring me out. Come on. And so they go up to the window, and they just start beating it in. They finally get a hole, and they throw in what they call a Greek fireball. And what that is, a big piece of metal with combustible liquid inside. My family doesn't know what that is. My mama sees that, tries to scoop it up with her apron, so heavy she can't even pick it up. My stepfather gets a shovel, scoops it up, throws it in the fireplace. Now, he didn't know what it was. So that thing gets hotter and hotter and explodes like a bomb. And a piece hits my stepfather in the head, knocks him out cold. A big piece of metal hits my mama in her arm, shatters her arm. She had to have it amputated that night. No anesthesia. And she didn't even get the worst of it. Big piece of metal hits my half-brother, Archie Samuels, 13-year-old boy, right in the gut. That metal so hot, it sears down through his bowels and kills him. That's what those detectives will do. That's what the government will let these guys do. They'll let them maim my mama, kill my kin. Things that an outlaw would never do. That's what those guys would do. John Newman Edwards puts that in the paper. And suddenly, everybody's on Jesse James' side. Even Northerners are saying, "Oh, this is too much." And so I'm really becoming like a national figure. People are really starting to root for Jesse James. I'm starting to feel really big about myself. I beat those detectives. I mean, it cost a hell of a lot. You know, my mama's arm is gone. My kin is dead. But we beat those detectives. And I figure we got to have more statements. You know, we can't just rob banks and trains. We got to have reasons why we do all of these bank robberies. We got to come up with something big. And that's when I thought of Northfield, Minnesota. Now I know what you're thinking. Northfield, Minnesota. Why would you ever go up there? Minnesota. You rob banks in Missouri, in Kansas, Iowa, even Kentucky and West Virginia. We robbed banks. You never went up to Minnesota. Well, I'll give you two reasons why we went to Minnesota. First one was a man named Benjamin Butler. If you don't know who that is, he was a Union general during the war. And he was in charge of New Orleans at the end of the war. And he was known for looting that town, took all the fine clothes and furniture he could, shipped it up north. His men raped the women down there, killing men. They called him Benjamin the Butcher Butler. And he lived up in Northfield, putting money in that bank. There's another man, a Delbert Ames, son-in-law of Benjamin Butler. He's actually from Massachusetts. But he was one of those carpetbagging senators, went down to Mississippi. Ended up being the governor of Mississippi. Now imagine that, being in Mississippi and your governor's from Massachusetts. I mean, no representation. Secessionists had nothing. They had to have the northern people telling them what to do all the time. So once the southern man started to get a little bit of political clout again, they brought up charges on Delbert Ames. Well, he didn't want to face that. So he just left, went up to Northfield. Family had a flour mill up there. He put money in that bank. So we're going to go up to Northfield, Minnesota. Now, I've never been there before. But we knew a man named Bill Chadwick. He's a native of Minnesota. So we were going to take him. We were going to take Clell Miller, old friend of the family, a guy named Charlie Pitts. Didn't know him that well. You see, the problem was we had to pick out new guys. You know, we didn't have those old bushwhackers anymore. The longer we lived, Arthur McCoy was gone. He was an old man when we robbed Gad's Hill. He was gone to Texas by then. But now we have these new guys. And one of the youngest wanted in on it. It wasn't Cole. His brother Bob wanted in on it. He hadn't done that many robberies, so he wanted to get in with us. We said, all right, Bob, you can come with us. Well, once Cole heard that we were going to take Bob with him, he's like, well, I'm coming with you. I mean, you boys must have planned this, but I'm just going along with you. So he comes along, and Jim comes along. So we got 8 guys going up to Minnesota. Now, maybe it's the arrogance and the pride and just having this big legacy about me, but there are a lot of things we did up in Northfield that we shouldn't have done. And one of them is, when you rob a bank, you just want to get into town, rob the bank, get out before they even knew you were there. Well, we didn't do that in Minnesota. We didn't know the place. We scouted it out for 2 weeks, and we looked like Southern pride coming to that. We stuck out like a sore thumb. We had big horses, big hats. We said we were cattle prospectors, but it didn't matter. They always had their eye on us no matter where we went there. So when we actually were going to rob that bank on September 7th, 1876, 100 years after this country was created. It's amazing what happens to a country every 100 years or so, isn't it? But we go in there. And maybe, Bob was a little nervous and there were some new guys and they pulled out a quart of whiskey. Now, they don't let Cole know about it because Cole doesn't drink and doesn't like people to do. Well, so we start passing that whiskey around right before we go into town. And that was not a good idea. When you got the whiskey on the brain, you really shouldn't be robbing banks. But we go in there, and we probably shouldn't have even gone in. There's so many people on the street. You want a clear street. But 3 of us went in. Cole was on the street. Clell Miller was on the street for crowd control. 3 of them watching the bridge so we could get away. But Frank and I go in, and Bob goes in. And I go, and I look at that cashier, and I say, we intend to rob this bank. We got 40 bandits outside. And if you say hello, I'm going to blow your head off. Now, if you got a gun on you, and you're supposed to open a safe or a vault, you're taking your life in your own hands. So what you going to do? This cashier, Joseph Haywood, wanted to protect the money. So he ran to that vault and shut it. Said it was a time lock. He could not open that safe. He could not open that vault, so we start pulling out drawers looking for the cash bin. We couldn't find it. We found like a bin with about $30 in coins in it. We're just, it's the whiskey. We're getting all frantic and everything. And we're starting to beat him on the head. telling us where it is. We pull out a knife on him. He still won't tell. And that's when I just have to live up to my questions. What you gonna do? I put a bullet in his head. No more Joseph Hayward. The other cashier runs outside. And that's when we notice there's already shooting on the streets. Well, someone was peeking in already. So Clell Miller went up to him. And he, starts shooting up in the air. Get off the road, you sons of bitches. That's what he said. And then cleared the streets. That's what we wanted. We wanted a clear street. But this is September in Minnesota. It's hunting season. It's a fool thing to do. Everyone ran to a secure location. They already had loaded guns and just started shooting at them. So by the time we got out there, they were really starting to pick us off. Now, they didn't shoot that well, but there was a couple sharpshooters in there. The hardware store owner, A.R. Manning, that guy could shoot. He put one in the chest, Bill Chadwick. He shot Clell Miller right in the head. When Cole went to look at Clell, he gets shot in the hip. My brother Frank gets shot in the leg. Bob Younger gets shot right in his arm, shatters his whole arm, can't do anything with it. Jim gets shot in the jaw. Me, they miss me. And that's when I heard Cole say, we're beaten, boys, we got to get out of here. I've never heard him say that in my life. We're beaten. I've been robbing banks and trains for 10 years. Never been beaten, undefeated. And so we're scampering out of town with $30 in change. And they said there was a cash drawer in there with $2,000 in it. They said that vault wasn't even locked. We didn't even check the vault. We just listened to him say it was a time lock. We forgot to check. Whiskey on the brain. There's about $15,000 in that bank. We got $30. So we have to crawl out of town. We ride our good horses as long as we can. And we have to switch them for plow horses. It starts to rain. We're starting to crawl, going about 2 miles a day. We find this one little farmhouse, abandoned. And that's where we got to make a decision. Bob is just bleeding, gushing. He's not going to make it. And I knew that right there. And I said, well, we have got to just let Bob go, or we're not going to make it out of it. And that's a cold thing to say, but it's the truth. Now, you tell Cole Younger that, and he's not going to let that happen. Now, Cole and I were not really good friends anyway. We were very loyal to each other, but we didn't like each other, so he didn't want to hear that. Well, I said, I'm getting out of there. And of course, the Youngers are going to stay together, and Charlie Pitts didn't think he wanted to go on either. So that left Frank. Now, Cole and Frank were good friends. They had been good friends since the war, and before, even as kids, they knew each other. So it was really Frank's decision. Is he going to stay with the Youngers, or is he going to stay with his brother? Well, everybody stayed with their kin. And Frank came with me, and the Youngers stayed there. And you know what happened to the Youngers? They did catch up with them. Charlie Pitts gets shot, and the Youngers get put in prison. 25 years for Jim and Cole. Bob doesn't make it. He's in prison for a little while, but he dies there. So that just leaves Jesse and Frank James trying to get home. And we're using every trick we have to get home. We find a doctor at gunpoint. He bandages up Frank's leg. And we're in South Dakota country. We don't even know where we are. We don't have a guide. We're stuffing grain sacks with hay for saddles and using ropes for stirrups, trying to get out of there. And finally, we find Sioux City, Iowa, Missouri River. I was never so happy to see that tumultuous river in my life. So we get a raft and ride down part of the way, get a cart, and put Frank in the back of the car. We start zigzagging, go from Iowa to Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. Frank's calling me dingus the whole way. It's tough. 500 miles. Longest getaway of my life. After that, Frank just doesn't have the taste for it anymore. And we got to go and hide out. We got to get out of Missouri, because everyone in America heard about that one. Jesse James boys, defeated, Youngers in prison. We go down to Nashville, lay low. I stay under the name Howard. Frank's Woodson. And he starts farming like we did when we were kids. And he liked it. He liked getting up early and working hard and doing that. I couldn't do that anymore. He tried playing poker. Now, Frank was good at poker. Like I said, he was a cold-blooded killer. He didn't have any tells. I had all kinds of tells. Frank played like a preacher. And I'm just sitting there and I'm laughing and smirking. They know what I got in my hand. I can't play poker. But I could ride a horse. So I started riding the track there. I got myself a fine horse named Red Fox. I would run that horse. We'd win races. We'd throw races. I'd paint that horse a different color, you know. Anything you could do. But the track has a way of taking as much money as it gives you. So I have to sit there and think to myself, well, what am I really good at? I'm an outlaw. It's the only thing I've been good at. I'm the greatest trade and bank robber in the United States history. So what am I going to do with myself? So I go back to robbing banks and trains. But I don't have those old Confederate guys anymore. The youngers are gone. Frank comes along for some of them, half-heartedly, you know, just to help out. I got to get all these new guys. There's no loyalty. Arthur McCoy once told me that a true Confederate soldier would never turn on another true Confederate. And that's true. But these weren't Confederates. These weren't bushwhackers. These were kids. And they didn't have any loyalty. They would turn on each other after a robbery. You know, they would argue over on the cut. They would flash their money around and get arrested. One of them, Ed Miller, Clell Miller's brother. He challenges me to a duel because he's mad about Clell getting shot in Northfield. So he pulls his gun. I pull mine. He shoots off my hat. And I shoot off his head. No more Ed Miller. These are the guys that I'm robbing banks with. So I've kind of fallen on hard times lately. But I think my luck's about ready to turn around. I'm back in St. Joe, living under the name Howard with my wife, Zerelda, call her Z. I got 2 kids, Jesse Jr., Mary. They don't even know that they're Jesse James kids. They think they're Howards. But I just brought this boy down named Charlie Ford. And he's staying with us now. He's going to bring his brother Bob pretty soon. We're going to rob a bank over in Platte City. There's a big trial going on there, a good distraction. I think that's going to turn out good for us. But let me tell you something. No matter what happens to Jesse James, no matter how many banks I rob or trains I rob in the future, I just want you to know one thing. There will never be another Jesse James. You can bank on it. I want to thank you for listening to me tonight and to tell the story about Irish. You've been a wonderful
Ladies and gentlemen, Jesse James.
Slight interruption here. Somebody that has their lights on in their car out there is trying to leave. They're not feeling very well. They're blocked in by 2 cars. A black Ford Edge, license plate, first 3 numbers like KB5, a black Ford Edge, and in front of them is a sort of a gold color, maybe a Chrysler Concourse or Concorde or sort of a big car out there. So if that's one of your 2 cars, if the 2 of you could go out there and move your car, please, so the gentleman can leave. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, you don't know what car is.
What are you talking about? Get on your horse and ride.
If there's a horse blocking another
No, there's 2 horses there. Get your horse out of here. Come on.
Okay, who has a question for Jesse James? Oh, come on.
We got one over there.
Here's one.
What year today is?
What year is today?
What year is today?
It is 1882. It's about April 1st. April Fools.
Okay, here's a question.
When did I die? I don't know. What year do you die?
Okay, save your question. Save your question. Okay, save your question. Who else has a question? Over here.
Did you really rob a bank in St. Genevieve?
Oh yeah, I robbed a bank in St. Genevieve. Yeah, that was really Frank's idea though, because he knew about Hildebrand. And I know you guys know about Hildebrand, don't you, being that close to it. So we were doing a little tribute down there in St. Genevieve. And so we robbed that bank and we whooped down the street saying, "Hurrah for Hildebrand! Hurrah for Hildebrand!" Whooped out of that town. So yeah, we did go down there and rob it.
What's your question?
How many banks and trains did you rob?
Well,
How many banks and
how many
trains
banks?
did you rob?
Well, I would like to think at least 2 dozen banks and 12 trains. But you know, so far, yeah, I'm not done. Come on.
Okay, I have a question back here.
Did you rob the paymaster down at Valley Mine?
Oh yeah. See, but that was with the new boys, and that was just like a, scratch and run kind of thing. I mean, that was a kind of a planned thing. Now this was down like Muscle Shoals, basically. We're down in Alabama, and we were just running through there robbing stagecoaches. We didn't have a plan as much. These were the new boys, and so we were just going and grabbing everything we could. And it wasn't the right way to rob a bank. We didn't have any kind of good statements anymore. We weren't making a statement for the Southern man. We're robbing from the South. So, we did rob down that payroll, but by then we're just scratching, trying to get anything we can.
Okay, I have a question right here.
How many men did it say you get?
How many men did I
How many
kill?
planes?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you count the war, I don't even know how many men fell on me. But, yeah, I would say at least 20 men. No women.
Okay, we have a question over here.
No, it was the one about how many.
Okay, same question. Both sides of the stage. Yes, ma'am.
A diamond mine in Arkansas. I don't recall robbing any diamond mines. Do you know where that's at, though? I would like to get out there. That sounds like something promising. We should get into rocks and jewels, shouldn't we?
Just how much did you get from the bank?
How much did we get? Now, if you count all the trains and all the banks so far now, and this was all split up between different people, but we had about probably $500,000. And you got to remember, 19th century goes a long, long way. But the thing was, we never saved our money. Right now I got to rob another bank, so I don't have that much money left. That's why we kept robbing banks.
Okay, we have a question back in the back. Over here, this side. Yes?
Do you think hiring Bill Bob Ford is a good idea?
Do you think hiring Bob Ford is a good idea?
Well,
What?
I have to admit, I don't know Bob very well. Now, I like Charlie Ford. Charlie kind of reminds me of my brother Frank. But, Charlie vouches for Bob, so I'm gonna trust Charlie on that one. And we'll get him into the gang, and he'll get into the spirit of it. We'll have a good time together. I think he'll get into the gang and be just fine. But I don't know him too well yet.
I had a question right over here somewhere. Yes?
Were you a member of the KGC, Knights of the Golden Circle?
Say that again, I'm
Were
sorry.
you a member of the KGC, Knights of the Golden Circle?
Well, I was not a member of any sort of official organization.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, would we get together with anybody and everybody? Sure, but no. I couldn't even be a member of the church because they knew me that well. So,
One more.
Did you guys really hide out in Merrimack Caverns?
hide out where? I'm sorry.
Merrimack Caverns.
Merrimack Caverns. Oh yeah. No, anywhere there's a cave, anywhere you need to hide. That's the great thing about Missouri. There's a lot of places to hide out, and even in Indian Territory. Now, Belle Starr hit us out there in Indian Territory. Anytime it got hot, we could always go to Texas and hang out with Belle Starr. She was a sweetheart that way.
Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Worley. Now, as I told you, I did a little research today. And I couldn't do this when he was Jesse James because he wouldn't know what this was and he wouldn't know what I was showing. But when I Googled Jesse James, here's what came up. In the news, Jesse James visits Bonne Terre at Big River Chautauqua tonight. But it looks amazingly like Aaron Worley.
Jesse James moved to Bonne Terre.
Story right here. Now, who has a question for Aaron Worley? And let's take your question first.
What year did you die?
What year did Jesse
I
die?
hope it's not this year. What year did Jesse die? Jesse actually died probably a day later than what I said. What actually happened is when Charlie Ford was living with him, he brought his brother Bob down. They were planning to rob the bank in Platte City, but there was a reward out on Jesse James for $5,000. The Governor Crittenden had put that out, and so they were up in St. Joseph. Bob hadn't been there that long at all, and Jesse was in his room, and there was a dusty picture. So he went up to dust off the picture. And it was very hot. And he took off his jacket and he took off his guns and he turned his back to Bob, and Bob put one right in the back of his head.
Okay.
Bob Ford got him.
So maybe Bob
That
wasn't
coward,
correct, yeah.
Bob Ford, shot Tom Howard. Made a song about it.
Okay, who else has a question? Okay, right here.
I didn't hear.
What's that? They were about 6 and 2, and they actually never knew that their father was Jesse James until he was dead. They always thought they were the Howards, and so that really messed with his son, Jesse James Jr. He was kind of tormented. His son actually portrayed his father in the first Jesse James movies. In the first 2 Jesse James movies, his son played his father. But he also became a lawyer, so I guess you're going to be on one side of the law or the other side of the law when you're one of the James.
I missed this question over here a while ago, so do you have a question?
So you rob banks, you have all this money. What did you actually do with the money that broke you all the time?
Oh, well, we would spend the money on everything. I mean, they would spend the money on horses. They would spend it, you know, they would just throw it around, basically. Not always throw it around, but they would buy the finest of everything. They were Southern guys and they loved their horses. Jesse always had the best of everything. But he didn't get all that money himself. You know, he did have to split it up with everybody. But, you know, it's not like he lived a well-to-do life, because actually his wife was in poverty when she died. So the money was spent and just passed around.
Okay. Yes, and then we'll come to you. Oh.
Yeah, I've got a... Well, it's funny because when you're, she's asking about a part I played on a TV show. It was called Better Call Saul. It was like a spin-off of Breaking Bad, if you know that show. And it's had 1 season so far. And my character was actually called Fifth Sucker. That was what it was. And basically Saul is back in Chicago and he's grifting people. And the thing he's doing with me is like some tar money scam. And so he's teaching me that, you know, you can scratch off this money, and so I'm very happy that I'm going to be part of this scam. But they're really scamming me. It's part of a montage, basically. As I've said to a few people, I'm good for 5 seconds in any television series in America. So I come in and rough up somebody and then leave, and that's pretty much the roles I'm getting so far.
Oh my goodness, how many horses did he own?
Oh, wow, yeah. I mean, they were riding horses since they were little kids. You know, how many did he own and how many did he take? I mean, he rode probably 1,000 horses in his life. Just growing up in northwest Missouri and the Snyabar there, they became expert horsemen. Anybody that was up there, it's actually, if you rode in this area, imagine riding your horses through the trees in here and just to learn how to ride. So I would say he rode 1,000 horses and owned a couple hundred in his lifetime.
We have a question way in the back.
What was the biggest or most amount of money you got from the bank?
What's the largest haul he made?
Largest haul was actually a train in Muncie, Kansas, of all places. And he robbed it. They got $30,000 off that train. And the thing was, he robbed that right after he got married, because, you know, when you get married, you got to have a little nest egg for it. And it was pretty much like Gad's Hill. It was a very remote, out-of-the-way place. They did pretty much the same thing as holding up the red lantern and robbed it. They pulled off the baggage car there. So the passengers were actually separated from what they were robbing, but that was their biggest haul, was in Muncie, Kansas, of all places.
So what was the biggest bank haul?
Bank haul that he got. Well, that is a good question. I would have to say the Clay County Savings Association. They never got more than $57,000. But a lot of that's in government bonds, and how much is that really worth? But that was their biggest haul, was actually the first one, because they were actually planning on paying the union pensions pretty soon after that. That's why they had so much money in the bank at that time.
Any more questions for Aaron? There's one.
Were you aware that Better Call Saul is the nominator for an Emmy?
Oh, well, that's good. Well, it's filmed in Albuquerque, and we love that. So that, and they've actually they filmed the first 2 seasons of Better Call Saul at the same time. So we just hope it keeps getting picked up, and we just love that we have the films and TV out there, and just gives local people like me a chance to stop by and say hi and all that.
Let's take one more.
When you robbed the bank in St. Terry,
Oh my goodness.
How'd you get to St. Genevieve? How'd you get away, and who was with you?
Oh my goodness. Well, we get in and get out as quickly as we can. So, you know, just basically through the trees. I couldn't tell you which way we went, but basically as long as we made it back to Kearney, then we were doing fine. But basically, you don't really think about the path you're taking in the beginning because you got posses after you. Your goal in the beginning is to get as far away as you can, as quickly as you can. And once you've gotten about 50 miles away, you know they're not going to catch you. And it doesn't matter which way you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Worley.
Thank you.